The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Seeing that many others have undertaken to draw up accounts of the events that have taken place amongst us, exactly as these were handed down to us by those who from the outset were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word, I, in my turn, after carefully going over the whole story from the beginning, have decided to write an ordered account for you, Theophilus, so that your Excellency may learn how well-founded the teaching is that you have received. Jesus, with the power of the Spirit in him, returned to Galilee, and his reputation spread throughout the countryside. He taught in their synagogues, and everyone praised him. He came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day, as he usually did. He stood up to read, and they handed him the scroll of the prophet Isaiah. Unrolling the scroll, he found the place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord has been given to me, for he has anointed me. He has sent me to bring the good news to the poor, to proclaim liberty to captives, and to the blind new sight, to set the downtrodden free, to proclaim the Lord's year of favour." Then he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the assistant, and sat down, and all eyes in the synagogue were fixed on him. Then he began to speak to them. This text is being fulfilled today, even as you listen. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
I have a slightly unusual Gospel passage today. First of all, it's in fact two different parts of St. Luke's Gospel that have been joined together. The first 4 verses were the very first verses of his Gospel, from chapter 1, and then we went on to chapter 4. So having skipped all the infancy narratives, and then Jesus' baptism and the temptations in the wilderness, then we come to him, his beginning of his public ministry in Nazareth, when he's in the synagogue teaching there. It's unusual to have this great introduction, a very long and rather wordy introduction to his Gospel. And we think of the other Gospels, Matthew, Mark and John. Only Mark has a bit of an introduction, and his is rather brief, rather characteristic of his Gospel. He just says, the good news of Jesus Christ, Son of God, and then goes straight into Jesus' baptism and temptations. Luke gives a rather a wordy account, and in there he's got quite a lot of important bits, so it's quite worthwhile reading that over again and looking out for certain key things. First of all, is there actually can we detect a sort of a little motif of saying, well, the others haven't done a very good job, so I'm going to do a better job than them? He's saying, well, others are trying to write the accounts of the Gospel, the good news, but in brackets we might almost read, I don't think they've done it very well, so I'm going to write this account here. And he's very clear, his idea is to make it a very clear historical account of what has happened. He's also making it clear that he wasn't himself a witness to these things. Luke wasn't a witness. He comes in later with, in Paul we find him, but he wasn't one of the early witnesses of what Jesus did. He wasn't one of the disciples, the apostles. But he relies on their witness. So he says, well, the witness we've received and what I'm relying on, all these accounts, and I've tried to study it and listen to lots of different people who knew Jesus himself. So I've really taken pains to make an ordered study of what has happened. So in this, we see a man who's actually quite well educated. His Greek is very good, much better than the other apostles, evangelists rather. And he's also trying to make a very ordered account, a structure in his mind. And we can see in his Gospel, of course, a very clear structure, particularly in terms of it looking like a pilgrimage towards Jerusalem. Jesus' life and public ministry is all directed towards Jerusalem. So he also is saying that he's got particular things that he wants to look out for in his gospel that we might not find so clearly presented in the other gospels. So Jerusalem is one thing, the importance of the temple, and we find the importance of Jesus at prayer, and Jesus' attitude to women, very important, a very positive attitude towards women, and also an attitude towards riches, and quite a lot of challenging statements that he puts in from Jesus about the dangers of wealth. So he's really setting us very clearly what he's trying to do in his gospel. It's an accurate account. Another point that we might notice, which is very different from the other gospels, is that he's actually got a person he's addressing the gospel to. Did you notice the name? Theophilus. And he uses the same person he addresses, the Acts of the Apostle. So both of his two works, which are a bit like two volumes of Christianity, if you like, are both addressed to this person, Theophilus. And he calls him Your Excellency, or Most Noble in the Greek, really, which might be a title of a person of very high rank who's actually obviously converted already, from what we read, that he's already received a gospel. But the name Theophilus, or the Greek is Theophile, is two words that you might recognize. Theo, we know the word theology, which is the study of God, or theophany that we've been thinking about with the Epiphany and so on. So it's God. And phile, you heard the word philanthropist. Anthropos, another Greek word actually meaning man, right? So someone who loves people, or a francophile, someone who likes French, loves France. So the phile there, phile, means love. So the two words together, theo and phile, make the name of the person. Well, you could interpret it in two ways. First of all, it could be one who is loved by God, the beloved of God, or it could mean the other way around, someone who loves God, God lover. Perhaps it means both joined together. And so if we interpret it like that, in fact, he's writing to each one of us. So he's given a name to the reader. And as he's made it clear, he's writing to people who are already converted. So when we read this gospel and we read Theophilus, he might actually be speaking to each one of us. I prefer that interpretation, don't you? That sounds a bit better than just speaking to someone we don't really know. But I think that's really what was behind his intention. To say each one of us who's reading it is Theophilus. He can say each one of us here, Theophilus, we're loved by God and we're trying to love God himself. I mentioned that he's trying to give a very clear historical account, but it's very important that he's also saying this is something that affects us. It's not just a history. There was a Jewish historian called Josephus, and he wrote History of the Jews, the Jewish Antiquities and things like that, which included a little bit about Jesus and John the Baptist. That's just historical. He's doing something much more than just an historical account of what had happened in the life of Jesus. He's saying this affects us. And we can read, if we're careful, we can look at certain words that help us to decipher actually this is what he's saying. So it's been handed down to us, something that's handed over, a tradition that's affecting us. And the teaching that you have received, the word for teaching there is katechese in Greek, which means you have been taught. And we know that word, don't we, as well? That means a catechist, someone who teaches, or a catechumen, to be catechized. Catechism all comes from that same word. So it's someone who has been brought into this faith, not just a student of history. And he's speaking about it as the truth. He's saying this truth has been handed over to you. So a slightly unusual bit of the gospel that we hear today, but well worth reading carefully, because it sets the tone for listening to the whole of the gospel that we'll continue to hear throughout the rest of the year.